All right, so today we're diving deep into 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. We're going to extract the core ideas, the surprising bits, and hopefully give you a shortcut to really understanding Peterson's thinking.
Interesting you picked this book. It's been incredibly popular, especially among millennials. It really seems to tap into a desire for meaning and direction in a world that can often feel chaotic, right?
Yeah, and Peterson himself, he's a bit of an enigma. Clinical psychologist, professor, best-selling author, and let's face it, a figure who sparks a lot of debate. But even his critics would agree. I think he's a deep thinker. He tackles those big questions about life and meaning and how to live well. I was struck by something in the foreword, actually. Dr.
Mhm.
Norman Doidge wrote about Peterson's conversational style. Apparently, he could just seamlessly blend these profound philosophical questions into just casual small talk.
Oh, wow.
Imagine being at a dinner party with him. You wouldn't know if you're about to discuss the meaning of life or the best way to grill a steak?
That does seem to capture the essence of his approach, blending the intellectual with the everyday. And I think one of the central ideas in 12 Rules for Life is that despite our individual differences, we all face, these universal challenges. And Peterson uses those challenges, the things we all struggle with as a springboard, to explore a framework for living a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
All right, let's dive into that framework. Let's dive into those 12 rules. And the very first one, stand up straight with your shoulders back, is a bit of a head scratcher at first. Peterson starts by talking about lobsters, of all things.
Yeah.
Apparently, we share this like ancient evolutionary heritage with these crustaceans, and it goes beyond just like physical similarities.
But it's about the dominance hierarchy.
Right.
Lobsters, like many animals, have a social structure where the most dominant individuals have access to the best resources: food, mates, shelter. And believe it or not, their posture, plays a key role in establishing and maintaining that dominance. A lobster that stands tall with its shoulders back, it's signaling strength and confidence, which influences, its interactions with other lobsters and even its access to those crucial resources.
Okay, so lobsters strutting their stuff, that's interesting. But what does that have to do with us? Are we really that similar to lobsters when it comes to social dynamics?
Well, Peterson argues that while we're obviously more complex than lobsters, the basic principle of dominance hierarchies still applies to human behavior. Our posture can actually influence how others perceive us, and even how we perceive ourselves. When we stand up straight, we project an image of confidence and competence, which can have a ripple effect, on our interactions,
Yeah.
our mood, even our levels of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter associated with
So
well-being.
it's not just about looking good, it's about feeling good too,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Peterson suggests that by adopting a posture of strength and confidence, we're not just faking it till we make it. We're actually sending signals to our own brains and bodies that can have a positive impact on our overall well-being. He even cites research showing that defeated lobsters experience a physical change in their brains, almost like they're rewiring themselves for a lower position in the hierarchy. So our physical state can actually influence our internal state and vice versa.
That's a pretty powerful image. A defeated lobster essentially rewiring its brain makes you think about how our own posture might be affecting us on a deeper level than we realize. So for our listeners out there, maybe it's time to do a posture check. Are you slouching at your desk, hunched over your phone? Maybe straightening up could actually give you a little boost, both physically and mentally. All right, on to rule #2. Treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. This one starts with a rather perplexing observation about organ transplant patients.
Yes. It's fascinating, isn't it? You'd think that someone who's just received a life-saving organ transplant would be incredibly diligent about taking their anti-rejection medication. After all, their survival depends on it. But surprisingly, a significant number of transplant patients fail to adhere to their medication regimen, putting their new organ and their lives at risk.
That's hard to wrap your head around. Why would someone risk their own health, especially after going through such a major medical procedure?
Well, that's the question Peterson grapples with, and it leads him to a deeper point about human nature. We often struggle to prioritize our own well-being, even when the stakes are high. We might neglect our health, sabotage our relationships, or make choices that undermine our long-term goals, all while knowing better.
So it's not just about laziness or a lack of willpower. There's something more fundamental going on here.
Right. Peterson suggests that it's often rooted in deeper psychological patterns. Maybe a sense of unworthiness, a fear of success, or even a belief that we don't deserve to be happy. We might find it easier to care for others than to care for ourselves,
Hmm.
even to the point of self-sabotage.
So this rule is challenging us to examine those deeper patterns,
Yeah.
to ask ourselves why we might be neglecting our own needs, even when we know better. And I think a lot of us can relate to that struggle.
Absolutely. And the key takeaway here is that caring for yourself is not selfish, it's essential. You wouldn't neglect a loved one's needs. Why would you treat yourself any differently? Peterson even frames it as a moral obligation. He argues that we have a responsibility to ourselves, to our well-being, and ultimately to the world to take care of our own physical, mental, and emotional health.
That's a powerful reframing, isn't it? It's not just about indulging in self-care for the sake of pampering ourselves. It's about recognizing that our own well-being is a necessary foundation for everything else we want to do in life. Okay, so we've talked about posture and self-care. Now let's move on to relationships.
Yeah.
Rule #3 is make friends with people who want the best for you, which seems pretty straightforward on the surface, but Peterson, as usual, goes deeper.
He does. He starts by drawing on his personal experience, sharing stories about his childhood friends, Chris and Ed, both bright, capable young men, but they struggled with, direction and purpose. They ended up, hanging out with people who weren't particularly supportive or ambitious, and their life took some, unfortunate turns.
So this rule isn't just about avoiding toxic people. It's about actively seeking out friendships that are truly nourishing and supportive.
Precisely. It's about surrounding yourself with people who believe in you, who challenge you to grow and celebrate your successes. The company we keep can have a profound impact on our trajectory in life. Peterson even suggests, a good test is to ask yourself, would I recommend this person to my sister, my brother, my best friend?
That's a great question. It forces you to really consider the influence those friendships are having on your life. Are they lifting you up? Are they holding you back? Are they aligned with your values and goals? Sometimes we might hold on to friendships out of loyalty or habit, even when they're no longer serving us. This rule's a reminder to be intentional about our relationships, to choose the people who bring out the best in us.
And sometimes it's about having the courage to let go of relationships that are no longer healthy or supportive.
That could be tough, especially if those friendships have long history. But sometimes it's necessary, right? For our own growth and well-being. Okay, let's move on to rule #4. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. This one hits home for a lot of us, especially in the age of social media, right? It's so easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others, to feel inadequate or envious of their perceived successes.
It's a natural human tendency, but it can also be incredibly destructive. Peterson brings in Price's law to illustrate the dangers of comparison.
Price's law. That's not something you hear every day. Can you explain that a bit for our listeners?
Certainly. Price's law, in a nutshell, states that in any given field, a small number of people will produce the majority of the output. Think about it. A handful of cities contain most of the world's population. A few authors sell most of the books. A small percentage of people hold most of the wealth. It's a pattern that shows up again and again across different domains.
So basically, there will always be outliers, those exceptional individuals who achieve extraordinary things.
Yeah.
But if we're constantly comparing ourselves to those outliers, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment, discouragement.
Exactly. Peterson argues that instead of fixating on the achievements of others, we should focus on our own progress, our own growth. He suggests that even small improvements, day after day, can lead to significant results over time. It's about shifting our focus from external validation to internal satisfaction.
So instead of asking, am I as successful as so-and-so, we should ask, am I better than I was yesterday?
Yes. And he ties this to the concept of gratitude. Instead of focusing on what we lack, we can appreciate what we have, what we've accomplished, and the progress we're making. Cultivating a sense of gratitude can actually boost our well-being and help us feel more content with our own lives, regardless of what others are doing.
That's a powerful reminder because so often we're so focused on what we haven't achieved that we forget to appreciate how far we've come. Okay, let's move on to rule #5, which is sure to spark some conversation. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. This one sounds a bit harsh at first glance. Is Peterson suggesting we should control our children's every move?
Not exactly. He's actually advocating for a balance between freedom and responsibility in parenting. He starts by highlighting the importance of discipline, not in a punitive sense, but as a way to guide children towards positive behavior and help them develop self-control.
So it's not about punishing children for being themselves, but about setting clear boundaries and expectations.
Yes. Peterson argues that children actually crave structure and limits. It provides them with a sense of security, and it helps them understand the consequences of their actions. He even uses the example of the Disney movie Sleeping Beauty to illustrate this point.
Sleeping Beauty. How does that connect to discipline?
Well, remember Maleficent. She wasn't invited to Aurora's christening because the king and queen wanted to shield her from, negativity. But ironically, that overprotection made Aurora even more vulnerable to Maleficent's curse.
It's like they created a void that Maleficent was able to fill. So shielding children from all negativity can actually backfire.
That's Peterson's argument. He suggests that children need to experience a certain amount of frustration, disappointment, even pain in order to develop resilience and to learn how to navigate the challenges of life.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between protecting our children and allowing them the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them. And it's a tough balance for sure.
It is, and this rule also challenges us to reflect on societal trends toward overprotection. Are we doing our children a disservice by shielding them from every potential harm, by removing all obstacles from their path? Are we inadvertently hindering their development of independence and resilience?
Those are thought-provoking questions for sure. Okay, let's move on to rule #6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. This one seems to be about personal accountability.
Exactly. Peterson draws inspiration from Tolstoy's own struggle with finding meaning, arguing that we often look outward, seeking to fix the world's problems when we haven't even addressed our own shortcomings.
So it's about looking inward before pointing fingers outward.
Yes, it's about taking responsibility for our own lives, our own choices, and the state of our own house, so to speak. Are we neglecting our health, our relationships, our finances? Are we contributing to the problems we see in the world through our own actions or inaction?
It's a call to focus on what we can control, to start with ourselves before trying to change the world.
Precisely. Peterson suggests that if we can't even bring order to our own lives, how can we expect to solve larger societal problems? It's not about becoming perfect or ignoring the world's problems, but about recognizing that true change starts from within.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about setting our own house in order before trying to redecorate the whole neighborhood, right? Okay, on to rule #7. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. This one seems to be about making choices that align with our values and long-term goals, even when they're difficult.
Yes. It's about resisting the temptation to take the easy road, the path of least resistance. Peterson argues that true fulfillment comes from pursuing what is meaningful, even when it involves sacrifice, hard work, and delayed gratification. He even uses the biblical stories of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel to illustrate this point.
So these ancient stories, they're still relevant today. What can we learn from them?
Peterson suggests they speak to the timeless human struggle with temptation, sacrifice, and the search for meaning. Adam and Eve's choice to eat the forbidden fruit brought knowledge, but it also brought suffering and the need to work. Cain's murder of his brother, Abel, highlights the dangers of envy and the desire for immediate gratification.
So these stories are cautionary tales about the consequences of choosing the expedient over the meaningful. But how do we know what is truly meaningful? How do we choose the right path when faced with difficult decisions?
Well, that's the question Peterson explores in the rest of the book. He provides a framework for understanding our own values, for identifying our strengths and weaknesses, and for making choices that align with our deepest desires and aspirations. He encourages us to ask ourselves, what is the most courageous thing I could do right now? He suggests that by aligning our actions with our values, even when it's challenging, we can create a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling.
That's a great place to pause for now. We've covered the first 7 rules, and I think our listeners have a lot to chew on already. In the next part, we'll delve into the remaining 5 rules and explore some of the deeper themes and connections that run through 12 Rules for Life. Welcome back to our deep dive into Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. We've already unpacked some pretty dense ideas, but things are about to get really interesting as we get into the second half of the rules. Peterson doesn't shy away from tackling some of the, darker aspects of human nature.
That's one of the things that sets his work apart. He's willing to explore the shadows, the parts of ourselves that, we might prefer to keep hidden.
Right.
He even connects this psychological concept to the biblical story of Adam and Eve.
So the Garden of Eden, the forbidden fruit, the fall from grace, it's not just a religious story.
Peterson sees it as a powerful metaphor for the human condition. He suggests that eating the apple represents our awakening to self-consciousness, to our own mortality, to the realization that, life is not always easy or pleasant.
It's like we traded blissful ignorance for the burden of knowledge, the awareness of our own limitations, and the inevitability of suffering.
Yeah, and this is where Peterson's ideas about meaning come in. He argues that meaning isn't something we passively find, it's something we actively create through our choices, our actions, our willingness to confront the darkness and bring order to chaos.
So it's not about seeking happiness or comfort, but about striving for something more, something that gives our lives, like, purpose and significance.
He even challenges the idea that happiness should be our primary goal.
Hmm.
He argues that a life focused solely on pleasure and ease, it can become shallow and ultimately meaningless. True fulfillment, he suggests, comes from pursuing what is meaningful, even when it's difficult, even when it involves sacrifice.
Okay, now I can see where some people might start to disagree with Peterson, right? He's been criticized for his views on gender roles, hierarchy, religion. Some find his ideas to be too traditional, too conservative.
It's true that Peterson's work does challenge some aspects of modern progressive thought. For example, he argues that hierarchy is a natural and inevitable part of human society, based on differences in competence and ability. He also questions the idea that all gender differences are purely social constructs, suggesting that biology plays a role as well.
And he's not afraid to critique postmodernism, the idea that there is no objective truth, that everything is just a matter of perspective. He argues that this kind of thinking can lead to nihilism and moral relativism, which can ultimately justify violence and oppression.
These are complex and controversial topics, and it's important to engage with them thoughtfully and respectfully. Peterson himself encourages critical thinking and open dialogue, even when discussing, difficult issues.
One thing I appreciate about his work is that he doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. He's willing to talk about aggression, dominance, even evil in a way that most people just avoid.
He uses examples from history, literature, and mythology to illustrate the timeless patterns of human behavior, the struggles that we all face.
And he connects those ancient stories to modern-day issues, showing how those same patterns are playing out in our own lives, our relationships, our politics.
One example that comes to mind is his analysis of the Disney movie Sleeping Beauty. He uses it to illustrate the dangers of overprotection, arguing that shielding children from all negativity can actually make them weaker and more vulnerable.
Wait, Sleeping Beauty? How does that connect to overprotection?
Remember Maleficent, the villain, she wasn't invited to Aurora's christening because the king and queen wanted to protect her from harm, but ironically, that overprotection made Aurora even more susceptible to Maleficent's curse.
So by trying to eliminate all risk, they actually increase the danger.
Exactly. Peterson argues that children need to experience a certain amount of hardship, of challenge, in order to develop resilience and coping skills. Shielding them from all negativity can actually, stunt their growth and make them more vulnerable in the long run.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? We want to protect our children, but we also need to give them the space to learn and grow from their mistakes.
This rule isn't just about parenting, though. It's about recognizing that we all need to face challenges in order to become stronger. We can't grow in a bubble.
Another rule that resonated with me was, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. It's a powerful reminder to focus on our own personal responsibility before trying to fix everyone else's problems.
Peterson argues that we often project our own inner chaos onto the outside world, blaming others for our own shortcomings. Instead of trying to change the world, he suggests, we start by changing ourselves.
It's about, cleaning up our own messes, so to speak, before trying to tidy up the whole neighborhood.
He even goes so far as to say that if we can't even bring peace to our own households, how can we expect to solve larger societal problems? It's a call to start with ourselves, to make positive changes from the inside out.
This idea of personal responsibility is a recurring theme throughout the book. Peterson emphasizes that we have the power to choose our actions, our thoughts, our attitudes, and ultimately to shape our own destiny.
He even connects this to the concept of free will, arguing that while we are certainly influenced by, our genes and our environment, we still have the capacity to make choices. We're not just puppets of fate.
But that freedom also comes with responsibility, right?
Right.
We can't just blame our circumstances for our problems. We have to own our choices and work to make things better.
This idea of meaning is another central thread in Peterson's work. He argues that meaning isn't something we find, out there in the world. It's something we create through our actions, our struggles, our contributions.
So it's not about searching for some pre-existing purpose, but about forging our own path and making our own mark on the world.
He even connects this to the concept of sacrifice, arguing that true meaning often involves, giving up something of value in the present for something greater in the future.
Like choosing to work on a challenging project instead of watching TV, or investing in our long-term goals instead of indulging in instant gratification.
Exactly. He suggests that these small acts of sacrifice, these moments of choosing the harder but more meaningful path, are what ultimately give our lives purpose and significance.
It's not about denying ourselves pleasure, but about recognizing that true fulfillment comes from aligning our actions with our values, even when it's difficult.
This idea of discipline is another key theme in Peterson's work. He argues that discipline isn't about punishment or deprivation. It's about making choices that align with our goals and values, even when they're tough.
Right. It's about delaying gratification, resisting temptation, and staying focused on what's truly important.
He even connects this to the concept of freedom, arguing that true freedom isn't about doing whatever we want whenever we want. It's about having the self-control to make choices that lead to a better life.
So it's about mastering ourselves, our impulses, our desires, so that we can become the authors of our own destiny.
Now, we've talked a lot about these big abstract concepts, right? Chaos, order, meaning, sacrifice, discipline, freedom. But how do these ideas translate into, practical advice for living a better life?
That's where Peterson's 12 rules come in. He offers concrete, actionable steps that we can take to improve ourselves, our relationships, and our overall well-being.
He even uses personal anecdotes and examples from his clinical practice to illustrate how these rules can be applied in real-life situations.
Some of his rules might seem obvious at first glance, right? Like stand up straight with your shoulders back, or make friends with people who want the best for you. But as we've discussed, Peterson always goes deeper, exploring the psychological and even biological underpinnings of these seemingly simple pieces of advice.
For example, he argues that posture isn't just about physical appearance. It's about projecting confidence and strength, both to ourselves and to others.
Right.
He even connects it to the dominance hierarchies that exist in the animal kingdom, using the example of lobsters to illustrate how posture can influence brain chemistry and social status.
Yeah, and he emphasizes the importance of choosing our social circles wisely. Surrounding ourselves with people who support our goals and values can make all the difference in our lives.
Some of his other rules might seem more controversial, like do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them, or set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. But, they challenge us to think critically about our roles as parents and as citizens.
He's not advocating for blind obedience or a return to traditional values. He's arguing for a thoughtful, nuanced approach to life that acknowledges both the good and the bad, the light and the shadow, within ourselves and the world around us.
He even challenges the idea that we should strive for a utopia, a perfect society free from all conflict and suffering. He argues that this kind of thinking is naive and ultimately dangerous, as it often leads to totalitarian ideologies that seek to impose their vision of perfection on everyone else.
Instead, he suggests that a more realistic and ultimately more fulfilling goal is to strive for a society that allows for individual freedom and responsibility, while also promoting cooperation and compassion. It's about finding a balance between order and chaos, between individual and collective, between the needs of the self and the needs of others.
This idea of balance is another recurring theme in Peterson's work. He argues that we need to find a balance between opposing forces, order and chaos, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, reason and emotion.
He suggests that this is the path to wholeness, to psychological health, and ultimately to a more meaningful life.
He even connects this to the concept of the hero's journey, a common archetype found in myths and stories across cultures. The hero typically sets out on a quest, faces challenges and trials, confronts, his or her own fears and weaknesses, and ultimately returns transformed, having gained wisdom and strength.
So Peterson suggests that we all have the potential to embark on our own hero's journey, to confront the challenges of life, to overcome our limitations, and to become something more than what we are. It's a journey that requires courage, discipline, and a willingness to face the unknown. But it's ultimately the path to a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
One of the most powerful aspects of Peterson's work is his ability to connect these ancient stories and archetypes to modern-day issues. He suggests that the same patterns that played out in the myths of our ancestors are still playing out in our own lives, in our relationships, our communities, and our world.
By understanding these patterns, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. We can see the connections between our individual choices and the broader societal landscape. We can recognize the forces that shape our lives, both for good and for bad.
And most importantly, we can learn to navigate these forces more effectively, to make choices that align with our values and goals, to create a more meaningful and fulfilling life for ourselves and for others.
All right, let's dive back into those 12 rules. We left off with rule #7, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Now on to rule #8, tell the truth, or at least don't lie.
This rule seems straightforward enough. But Peterson, as always, goes deeper than just advocating for honesty in our daily interactions. He explores the psychological and societal consequences of living a life based on deception, both towards others and ourselves.
All right.
He even shares like a rather poignant anecdote about a client he encountered during his clinical psychology training.
Oh.
This client was intensely focused on honor and respect, but his inability to tolerate even the slightest perceived disrespect led to a series of conflicts and ultimately restraining orders against him.
So this client's obsession with truth, or at least his version of it, actually ended up isolating him and causing him more problems.
It highlights the danger of conflating truth with our own subjective interpretations, and the importance of being willing to question our own perceptions.
So this rule isn't just about avoiding outright lies. It's about cultivating a deeper commitment to honesty, both in our dealings with others and in our relationship with ourselves.
Peterson argues that even small lies, the white lies we tell to protect ourselves or others, can erode trust and create, a web of deceit that's difficult to untangle.
It's like that saying, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive."
He also connects this rule to the concept of integrity, arguing that living in accordance with truth, even when it's difficult, is essential for building a strong and authentic self.
So it's not just about being good, it's about being whole, right? About aligning our actions with our values.
And he suggests that this kind of integrity is essential for building healthy relationships, both personal and professional.
It makes sense, right? Trust is the foundation of any strong relationship, and trust is built on honesty.
Now onto rule #9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. This rule encourages us to approach conversations with humility and a willingness to learn.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that everyone has something to teach us, even those we might disagree with.
Peterson goes beyond just, polite listening, though. He argues that genuine listening can be a transformative experience, leading to new insights and even personal growth.
He even uses the phrase outsourcing our sanity, suggesting that we rely on the feedback of others to help us regulate our own behavior and understand the world around us.
Think about it. We constantly use the reactions of others to gauge whether our actions are appropriate, whether our ideas make sense.
It's like we're constantly checking in with our social mirrors to make sure we're not going crazy.
Exactly. And this rule challenges us to be more intentional about our listening, to really try to understand the other person's perspective, even if it differs from our own.
So it's not just about waiting for our turn to speak, it's about actively engaging with the other person's ideas and trying to learn from them.
It's about recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that there's always more to learn, and that other people might have valuable insights that we haven't considered.
This rule is a great reminder to be open-minded and curious, to approach conversations with a spirit of inquiry rather than judgment.
Now on to rule #10, be precise in your speech. This rule highlights the importance of clear and accurate communication.
It's about choosing our words carefully, avoiding ambiguity and vagueness, and striving to express ourselves in a way that is both meaningful and understandable.
Peterson uses a powerful metaphor to illustrate this point. He talks about a pen of light that writes illuminated words.
It sounds almost mystical.
He's trying to convey the idea that language has the power to illuminate, to bring clarity to our thoughts and experiences.
So by using precise language, we're not just conveying information, we're shaping our own understanding of the world and helping others to do the same.
Exactly. And he argues that vague language can lead to confusion, misunderstanding, and even conflict.
Oh yeah. Think about how often arguments arise from misinterpretations or assumptions about what the other person meant.
This rule challenges us to be more mindful of our communication, to strive for clarity and precision, and to be willing to ask for clarification when we're not sure what someone means.
It's about recognizing that language is a powerful tool that can be used for good or for ill.
Now on to rule #11. Do not bother children when they are skateboarding.
This one seems a bit out of left field. What does skateboarding have to do with anything?
It's actually a metaphor for the importance of allowing children to explore their limits, to take risks, and to learn from their own experiences.
Yeah.
Peterson contrasts this with the tendency towards overprotection in modern society, where children are often shielded from any potential harm.
Why?
He argues that this kind of overprotection can actually stifle children's development, preventing them from learning important lessons about resilience, independence, and self-reliance. He even shares an anecdote about, like, skate stoppers installed on his university campus to prevent skateboarding, illustrating how, overprotection can extend beyond childhood and into adulthood. It's a reminder that a certain amount of risk is essential for growth and development.
Shielding ourselves or our children from all potential harm can actually make us more vulnerable in the long run.
It's about finding that balance between safety and freedom, between protecting those we care about and allowing them to experience the world and learn from their own mistakes.
So this rule isn't just about skateboarding. It's about fostering a culture of exploration, risk-taking, and resilience.
And it challenges us to question our own assumptions about safety and to consider whether our attempts to control every aspect of our lives or our children's lives might actually be doing more harm than good.
Okay, finally, on to rule #12. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street.
This one might seem like a whimsical addition to a book filled with profound philosophical insights, but it actually speaks to something very important: the power of small joys.
Oh, I like this one.
Peterson uses the act of petting a cat as a metaphor for taking the time to appreciate the simple things in life, to find moments of beauty and connection in the midst of our busy, often stressful lives. He even acknowledges that, the cat might ignore you completely because, well, cats are cats.
Right.
But even the attempt to connect, to offer a moment of kindness and appreciation, can have a positive impact on our own mood and outlook.
It's a reminder to cultivate gratitude for the little things, to be present in the moment,
Yeah.
and to find those small moments of delight that make life worth living.
So even amidst the chaos and complexity of life, there's always room for a little bit of cat therapy.
I love that.
Yeah.
We've now covered all 12 rules, but there's still much to explore in 12 Rules for Life.
Right.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll delve into some of the deeper themes and connections that run through the book, including the idea of truth, the nature of dominance hierarchies, and the importance of finding balance in our lives. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into 12 Rules for Life. As we've been exploring these rules, it's become clear that Peterson's doing more than just offering self-help tips. He's weaving together these ideas from psychology, philosophy, biology, even mythology to create this, framework for understanding the human condition.
It's like he's constructing a grand tapestry, showing how these seemingly disparate threads all connect to form this, bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the most prominent threads, I think, is this idea of truth. And as we discussed earlier with rule #8, it's not just about being honest with others, it's about living in accordance with reality, both internal and external.
He argues that self-deception, even if it's unintentional, can really lead us astray.
Yeah.
It can prevent us from seeing the world clearly, from making sound judgments, from taking responsibility for our actions.
It's like trying to navigate a maze with a faulty compass, right?
Yeah.
You might think you're headed in the right direction, but you're likely to end up lost.
Exactly. Peterson suggests that living in accordance with truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is essential for both personal growth and a healthy society.
So it's about, facing our fears, acknowledging our flaws, being willing to challenge our own beliefs.
He even connects this to the concept of meaning, suggesting that a life lived in truth is a more meaningful life.
It's about aligning our actions with our values, with what we truly believe, even when it's difficult.
Now, one of the most intriguing aspects of Peterson's work is his exploration of dominance hierarchies.
Yeah, this is a big one.
He argues that these hierarchies are not inherently evil, as some might suggest, but are a natural and inevitable part of human society, and even extend into the animal kingdom.
Right. We talked earlier about his lobster analogy, which some might find a bit far-fetched,
Right.
But it does raise some interesting questions about the role of dominance in our lives.
Peterson suggests that dominance hierarchies can provide structure and order, allowing for cooperation and the achievement of shared goals.
Think about it. Every organization, every team, every family even, has some form of hierarchy.
The key, Peterson argues, is to ensure that those hierarchies are based on competence and fairness, not just raw power or arbitrary rules.
So it's not about eliminating hierarchy altogether, but about creating systems that are both effective and just.
He also challenges the idea that all competition is bad. He argues that healthy competition can drive innovation, push us to improve ourselves, and ultimately lead to progress.
It's like that old saying, iron sharpens iron.
Right.
But it's important to distinguish between healthy competition, where everyone benefits from the challenge, and destructive competition, where it's all about winning at any cost.
Peterson suggests that striving to be better, to achieve something worthwhile, can give our lives a sense of purpose and direction.
It's not just about beating others. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves.
Exactly. And finally, let's revisit rule #12, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street.
I love this rule.
This one seems so simple, almost whimsical compared to some of the other rules, but
Yeah.
it speaks to something really profound: the importance of appreciating the small joys in life.
Right.
In the midst of all the chaos and complexity, it's so easy to get, bogged down by our worries and anxiety.
Yeah.
Peterson reminds us to take a moment to just breathe, to notice the beauty around us, to connect with something outside ourselves.
Yeah.
Even a simple act of kindness, like petting a cat, can shift our perspective and bring, a moment of peace.
It's about cultivating gratitude, being present in the moment, and finding those little things that make life worth living.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into 12 rules for life, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is this importance of personal responsibility. Peterson emphasizes that we have the power to choose our actions, our thoughts, our attitudes, and ultimately to shape our own destiny.
He also challenges us to confront truth, both within ourselves and in the world around us. It's about being honest, even when it's uncomfortable, and seeking knowledge and understanding, even when it challenges our beliefs.
And finally, he reminds us to find joy in the simple things, to cultivate gratitude, and to appreciate the beauty and wonder that exists all around us, even in the midst of chaos and suffering.
12 Rules for Life is a challenging book, but it's also deeply rewarding.
Yeah.
It offers a framework for living a more meaningful and fulfilling life, one that is grounded in truth, responsibility, and a deep appreciation for the human experience.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into 12 Rules for Life. Thanks for joining us. We hope you found it thought-provoking and maybe even a little bit life-changing. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a different book or idea.